Okay. And it's going to be really important in the planning for the Secretarial Order 3362, which is dedicated money and focus on protecting deer, elk, antelope, and they even moved it to bighorn sheep migration corridors on public lands. Now moving on to potential limiting factors and current and recent department actions to address them. This is a bad picture of the Smith Creek area. And this is a good example of ranches turning into ranchettes, or even worse, for migrating deer into housing developments. This process decreases habitat suitability through numerous direct and indirect factors. It directly decreases available habitat while adding additional disturbances on the landscape. Just more fences, houses, dogs, traffic, and generally more things to avoid. To address this issue, the department and its partners have started looking for ways to financially incentivize long-term protection of important private lands, whether through conservation easements or through the sage grouse conservation credit system. Moving on, this is really one of the most widespread and frustrating issues facing Area 10. Wild horse use is extensive in Area 10, with every primary and secondary winter range receiving year-round use by horses. You can see that the associated herd management areas range from 260% to 2100% of high AML set by the Wild Horse and Burro Act. And this is looking at 2020 numbers. So some of these are definitely worse than where they were. And response to horse use is very limited. Fencing of springs is one of the limited tactics that we have at our disposal to address this use. It really is just a band-aid approach that protects small tracts of habitat while not addressing the real issue. And thinking back to that collar map that I showed, you can imagine the hundreds of fence crossings involved while migrating, 100 to 120 plus miles. This is one area that I think that this process has a lot of potential to make great strides. By using our collective contacts and influence, I think that we have the opportunity to overlay the collar data and begin to tactically modify fences within the corridor to be more wildlife friendly. Options including taking out unneeded or outdated fences, installing wildlife friendly 3 or 4 strand fences with smooth wire bottoms, or strategically installing pipe rail fence sections to minimize the energy needed to cross the fences. This is a relatively easy and cost-effective way to begin benefiting thousands of deer annually. And you can see from these pictures that this is a year-round problem, as the picture on the left is a deer with a red summer coat, and on the right is a late winter picture of a deer that couldn't quite clear that fence. Predators can have a negative effect on deer herds, but it is typically at a local scale. With that being said, there have been numerous mountain lion and/or coyote projects in the recent past carried out by wildlife services and private contractors. Improper grazing is always a concern by any user group. Some of these ranges are seasonally grazed by domestic sheep, domestic cattle, and wildlife, while receiving almost constant pressure by horses. It's a lot to ask of these arid winter range sites to provide the needed resources for so many users, especially during drought periods. Disease is a tough one. We continue to monitor for disease opportunistically when collaring animals in recent years through check stations and through samples submitted to our offices. but it's often, when it's detected, it's often late. And CWD has not been detected in Nevada to this point, which is a great thing. EHD has been, it's typically a localized problem. BVD, I don't think we have a full understanding of how it affects deer statewide. It is quite prevalent, and it may be indicated in lowering overall fitness. And that's definitely an arena that the department's interested in kind of delving into in the future. Invasive species. This is an issue that continues to grow annually as new invasives continue to show up and expand in the area. The department recently contracted a remote sensing mapping of the west side of the Rubies that uses high resolution satellite imagery to identify specific veg classes. Luckily, the mapping did not produce any major surprises, but there are small inclusions of Medusa head that have been identified near Harrison Pass and near the mouth of Lamoille Canyon. And the department has been very active in trying to control them. As you can see, the department spent approximately $150,000 treating Medusa head since 2016. Fires have been pretty limited in Area 10 over the years, but the past 3 years have been pretty scary as some incredibly important transition and winter range areas have burnt. The 2018 Elko fire, probably, definitely a short-term loss of functionality, but should result in a long-term gain. The department and the BLM partnered to rehab the BLM portion of the fire with good success. The one sore spot with that fire is the Forest Service portion did not receive any treatment. The Owl Creek fire, 2018, if it was a standalone fire, would not have been a major worry. It did burn through some very important transition range, but it was relatively small. The problem came later in the year when the Range 2 fire lit off from more or less the eastern/northern edge of the Owl Creek burn scar. And the Range 2 fire quickly moved through thousands of acres, a crucial transition range that in mild winters like this past one is utilized as winter range. The department and its private partners dedicated a lot of time and money to the rehab effort of those 2 fires. And the most impactful fire to Area 10 was the Quarter Fire in 2019. Well, first I'll jump ahead to the Cherry Fire that burnt just after it. If it had been a standalone fire, the Cherry Fire is this one here in black. If it had been a standalone fire, it would not have sounded too many alarms, and in the long run, it should be beneficial, breaking up fuel loads and really burning through some pretty heavy PJ. But when coupled with the Quarter Fire in 2019, it was a major short-term concern. The Quarter Fire burnt through some of the most important acres of habitat for mule deer in the entire state. You can see that it burnt through the confluence of the western and eastern migration here. And a deer moving through the burns in 2019 was faced with up to 20 miles of black. Due to the importance of the burned acres, the department and its private partners committed over $400,000 to the rehab effort. And in recent years, and another way to address fires moving forward has been the use of fire breaks. And in recent years, there's been a number of proposed and or installed in Area 10. And I think this is another arena that this team may be well suited to attack: the identification and installation of strategic fire breaks on willing landowners' properties to slow down or stop fires from burning on these benches like the ones we've seen. And this is just a picture of the Quarter Fire rehab from last month. And you can see native grasses and forbs are reestablishing pretty well, but time will tell the effectiveness of the reestablishing the crucial shrub component and to what degree the invasive grasses are going to take hold. Moving on, Bald Mountain Mine. Mining interests date back to 1869, but have really ramped up in recent decades. And those familiar with Bald Mountain Mine know that there's relatively small ore deposits that are pretty widespread, and deer are subjected to multiple miles of disturbance as it sits now. And over the years, constant narrowing of the corridor widths. And at its extreme, the way it sits now, the mine is 10 miles east to west and over 23 miles north to south. I'm gonna go through a limited time-lapse series of pictures from Google Earth. As you can see, this is a picture from 1994. You can see small, limited, dispersed pits, those familiar with it. This is the front gate facilities. You're looking at top pit or what's going to be top pit here, some of the smaller eastern facilities. Jumping ahead to 2006, you can see major build out east to west on this top pit. And the establishment of some major haul roads over here. And some expansion of the front gate facilities. And then jumping ahead to 2014, you can see top pit expanding north, south, and east and west. And you can see really heavy exploration on this side. And then this is just showing the significance of the area in question. This is overlaying the collar corridors that we saw on those earlier maps. And there's an unfortunate overlap of ore bodies and the corridors as they sit. And then jumping ahead, this is the 2014 picture was the most recent one that Google Earth had. And this is just a little bit newer picture showing the build out on the east side here. You have more on the facilities here. You have this north-south running haul road that wasn't there. You have some build out here. And the right picture is showing the individual travel paths overlaid. And unfortunately, I didn't have a newer version of this picture. This picture is prior to the last expansion. It's looking south from approximately Overland Pass. And it shows the difficulty of direct passage for migrating mule deer. The maintenance of adequate corridor widths in the coming expansion plan will be key to minimizing the negative effects experienced by deer. PJ encroachment. This is one arena that we've seem to be seeing some success in recent years. The Spruce Mountain project has been in the implementation phase since 2013, with approximately 9,400 acres completed. With funding already in place, the final permitted acres should be treated in the coming winter. The Overland Pass project has been in implementation phase since 2015, with thousands of acres treated to date on Forest Service, BLM, and private lands. Newark and Huntington has been in implementation since 2017. There's been thousands of acres treated, generally from Bald Mountain down through Buck Mountain. And Long and Ruby just came online last year and will start in earnest this year. The department secured a couple $100,000 that was put on hold due to COVID last year, and we'll look to apply to the South Ruby projects this year. And the Ely BLM applied for and received around $1 million of SNPLMA funding for the bottom two projects here. And this is illustrating the South Ruby projects with the migration corridor overlaid in yellow. You can see the expansive nature of these projects. Overland being in red, and you can imagine that's 18,500 acres there. So you can see how big these other projects actually are. And of note, some of these long valley projects are not PJ projects. Some of them are sagebrush mowing projects, trying to reinvigorate some of those really arid, denuded sites. But for the most part, most of these other polygons are PJ sites. This is a picture from Spruce Mountain of a recently completed mastication project. You can see the loader there on the left. With the size and the scope of these projects, we are attempting to increase the productivity of the major winter ranges in Area 10. And upon completion of these projects, there's potential to expand in the future into the Mavericks, Medicines, Wood Hills, and really a few other sites. And I started with the Ruby Butte study, and so I thought I'd end with it. The authors state, quote, however, several decimating factors are presently at work which may well reduce this herd to scant numbers compared to present day levels. The most important decimating factor currently at work is the insipid destruction of winter range habitat for deer. This continual process receives its thrust from three forces, which are: one, improper livestock grazing; two, pinyon juniper encroachment; and three, wild horse use and abuse. I think we have made progress on factors 1 and 2, and I think the authors would be appalled with where we are with factor 3. I think this list is longer now, and this is what this team will hopefully be addressing in coming years. And I would just warn everybody to potentially turn down their volume. This isn't really meaningful, but it's just a video from this year's spring deer flight. I just threw that in there because it's just showing that there's still lots of deer on the landscape and hopefully potential for a lot more in coming years. And now we can take questions.
So Scott, what does the department see as our role in this process?
Just a moment there. I think that's a loaded question because I don't know if we know exactly how these teams are going to operate moving forward. I think the hope is to use everybody's collective connections and differing opinions and come up with real tangible solutions to some of these problems moving forward. I think it's building off what we've been doing in the past and hopefully come up with new solutions to some of these problems that we really haven't whipped yet.
And Bert, hey, this is Tom. We'll kind of touch on a little bit of that in the next section as well. So we can also have some Q&A after that part.
Okay. Yeah, I see some of those problems you initially put up on the board, which I don't remember all of them as being really vital, but fire, you talked about fire being minimal in that unit. Yeah, over the last 10 or 15 years, I think fire has been real minimal, but Cass House, everything south of Lindsay Creek burned over the last 30 years, 40 years. And it took out a ton of winter range down there that, I don't know. I mean, I know guys used to go in there all the time and see hundreds and hundreds of deer, but they couldn't get around much because of the pinions in there and everything else. Now the pinions are gone, and things are coming back, but there was a lot of fire down there in the late 60s, no, clear back in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of fire in the south end of that mountain. And so I still feel 10, not so much as the rest of the county. Fire is one of our major issues, but 10, it's the horses. And if the department would issue a box of ammunition with every deer tag, and you use 20 of them, I know it's being recorded, and I know I don't care. When we took 20, each deer tag took 20 horses off that range, the deer herd had come back a little bit. It's my personal feeling. I'm just putting it out there. It's not going to go anywhere, and it's not productive, but I think that wild horse issue has to be seriously addressed, not just batted around and let the horse people tell us what to do on that winter range. I mean, yeah, there's room for some of them. But back in the 70s, we did a study down there when there was an Elko County Sportsman's Association on a Cracker Johnson chaining, when they chained instead of masticated that stuff. And you could see where the horses come by and pull everything out in spring and just pull it out by the roots and then spit it out. They'd chew part of it and spit it out. I mean, it was destructive as hell. Those horses, you guys know it better than I do, but the horses, I think, bigger than fire. We need to get those horses off the range in some way, shape, or form. And if I can't generate a bunch of comments off of that,
You're not going to hear any arguments from us, I can tell you that.
Well, I know that.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to your point with fire, I think, what was the Shantytown fire, Caleb? 76? And
76 or 79.
yeah, I mean, there was
79, I think.
substantial changes to that eastern migration that never seemed to come back post fire there. So I think there's
that was a big one.
Yeah, big for 70s, not
Yeah.
big for 90s and 2000.
No, not now. But
yeah.
Well, I think it remains to be seen what some of those fires are really going to mean. But I know this winter there weren't many deer in that Harrison Pass area or even south of there. Didn't seem like they were using it much, where there used to be thousands.
Yeah, and you'll see it on collars still. Deer will get halfway across that burn, turn around, come back, because they haven't figured out that there's available resources on the other side. And we've had deer retract 3 different times before they finally would push through that burn. So I think we definitely have not felt the full effects of that court of fire yet.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of deer staged there behind Barnes's and Carville and all that for most of the winter, really. But I had a question for you on the collared deer that you had. You said you had 35 collared deer still collared, but what happened to the other 100 deer that were collared? And where did it happen?
Most of the collars have a battery life of around 2 years. And so a lot of those just timed out. And then we lost a lot of deer in 1819, that last major winter. And then you just see natural attrition every year. You lose some.
Right.
Some of the recent ones that I found, I picked up 3 on Friday that had died over the winter. One was for sure a mountain lion kill. Another one, I couldn't find any sign of the carcass. I really have no idea. And then the other one, if I had to guess, I would have said lion, but it had died early winter, and you 20% sure, maybe 40% sure, but couldn't say one way or another. But I mean, we've had deer hit by cars, you had some caught in fences, stuff like that.
I was just curious if they were wadding up somewhere, not moving past that area and starving out there, anything like that. And what their success is with moving through those restricted corridors, passing through, or are they kegging up in those areas and not moving past those areas?
We've definitely been able to document deer piling up on the north end of the mine site. And it's, you can see that they're moving at a pretty good pace. They'll hit that disturbance, they'll hang up there. And then if you get a major storm event and it just forces them through, they'll go and they'll shoot through, you might have 10 deer pass through in the same, 24, 48-hour period. But we've definitely documented that it is an impediment and those deer will keg up on that north end. And then to your point of getting down to some resource limited areas, we have seen some of those deer that make those big movements south of 50. I don't know if they die at a higher rate, but you'd have to tease it out, but it seems like it. They get down to where it's just really poor conditions. I mean, they're getting down to areas that those area 13 deer are leaving in October. And it's
They're
just
staying there all winter.
they get down there and they seem to die at a relatively high rate once they get all the way down there. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Hey Scott, I have a couple thoughts and now I know relatively the outer reaches of area 10, the bow shoots and the Dolly Vardens and spruce, and those are very, very small portions of what we're talking about. But I think, has there been any studies or anything correlating climate with deer movement from, say, like area 7 deer moving down and filling in some of these other smaller, more insignificant areas, and those deer populations shrinking? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I've seen the good years in some of those places, and there's many deer, and I'm wondering if maybe there's this a correlation between the climate not moving deer that far, or deer not moving into those areas and staying. Maybe we're not. Or is there anything out there that shows movement and climate kind of in conjunction with each other?
To answer your initial question, no, we haven't had callers in those areas.
Yeah.
We do have wintering deer from area 7 that cross the highway and get into the north end of the go shoots, and
Yeah.
Tuanos
Mhm.
and some of those deer. Let's see. So 2 over the years that Carrie's been collaring in earnest since 2012
Yeah.
have actually stayed in the go shoots themselves.
Mhm.
And I think there's something to what you're saying with climate and deer numbers in those areas. I don't know exactly what factors are, really forcing it one direction or the other.
Yeah.
But knowing that those horse populations have been 2000% of
Yep.
AML
Yeah.
for a decade, I think probably is a huge, at least short-term factor that's affecting them negatively.
The major factor in those shrinking populations of isolated deer.
Yeah, with very limited water sources.
Yeah,
And
of course.
I didn't show it, but Caleb was able to push through a fencing EA a decade ago. And the last couple of years, we've been fencing off some of those springs in the go shoots to address exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we've seen, you know, some limited success of protecting those small isolated waters. And in turn, it's protecting those small isolated pieces of habitat because the horses can't access it. But in recent years, we've kind of run into a few roadblocks with horse advocates, BLM personnel, just the whole gamut, droughts. And so we've kind of been on hold right now, but hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to finish off those fences.
Okay, thanks.
So along those lines, Scott, what kind of impact has, well, obviously we can tell, but with the Warm Springs horse thing going on, what kind of impacts that had on that area?
It hasn't had a beneficial effect on the Warm Springs Ranch itself. I mean, anybody who's driven by there,
Can see
but it's
that,
even kind of windy, and you see the valley blowing away. I would say that hasn't been a benefit by any means. And then, you know, a lot of the livestock AUMs tied to that ranch have been leased out in recent years, and they haven't been, you know, they've been used as domestic cattle AUMs. And so that portion of it's kind of been status quo. But we'll see where it goes.
So she's not taking those horses out on the BLM, they're staying on her private ground?
Correct. Yeah, it never came to fruition that she was running those on public ground.
I thought that's what had happened,
but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of wild horses where we're talking about anyways. And so, yeah, they're not her horses, but there's plenty of horses.
well, none of them are her horses, are they?
Well, they are, right? She bought them as livestock from an Indian reservation. So,
Oh, she imported those.
yeah,
Oh, I thought she brought them off the range.
no.
Oh, well.
This is Henry. One thing that did happen back in the 80s when they put the rubies in the wilderness, they took away the predator control. There used to be a full-time mountain lion hunter in here and at least 2 college kids or whatever that would trap and set out poison all summer long. And mostly that's what run off for your domestic sheep. Was it only took a couple of years before the predators were doing more damage to them than they could stand and put it into, and so when they changed over to beef, then the Forest Service cut their permits in half. From what I see, the high rubies are not a problem, I know that. But still, it's interesting to see where there was good open places for deer to graze in that are being overcrowded with weeds and brush that they're not using. So, it's just a topic that we haven't looked at tonight is the predators and if there's anything gonna happen with them. Habitat is a kind of hit and miss, in my opinion, because you have to relate on Mother Nature so much. You can dump all the seed in and do all that kind of stuff, but if Mother Nature doesn't cooperate, you're not going to get anything out of it. I would like to see more money spent on predator control. Last summer, I usually have two or three coyotes around mousing. And last year, I looked down the field and went down there and there was 7 coyotes had taken down a 500-pound calf and scattered them. And on the way back to the house, there was 3 more that were stalking a brand new calf. So I got 10 coyotes right there. Well, I usually had 2 to 3. You know, the numbers are way up. I talked to another rancher down the valley. He lost a cow. He drug it in the willows. 2 days later, he went down. There was 14 coyotes come off of that. So I know they do some flying, but I don't, you know, maybe, I don't know what the answer is there, but thank you.
To address that on the short term, actually do have a coyote project designed to protect antelope fawns in the valley going right now. Well, it should be completed for this year, but Wildlife Services was contracted to do work in there the last 6 weeks. I haven't heard exactly how successful they were, but kind of addressing that specific example, we are, you know, working towards it on a small scale. And kind of a point that Henry brought up there that I should have probably included in the presentation was just shrub decadence. And, you know, it is a major factor on the bench in Area 10, and kind of back to what we were talking about with fire breaks. I think there's a lot of potential to, you know, strategically look at breaking up some of these fuel loads and trying to promote, you know, younger age class of shrubs that's going to be more productive and not as fire prone is what we're dealing with on a lot of the benches on both sides of the rubies. And then circling back to the mountain lions and the high elevations, you know, that's always just going to be a difficult prospect. We have had some lion projects in the last couple of years. We don't have any going presently, but it's definitely something, if we can figure out a way to be effective at it, and if we can figure out that there is, you know, a set problem that we can address, we'd be willing to, you know, look at it for sure.
Hey, hey,
good.
Scott.
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, thanks. I have a question about the age and like, I guess going back to the shrub thing about age, and is there some age or stage of life when that older, taller sage and bitterbrush maybe becomes less lower forage value for deer than say the newer, younger growth stuff? I mean, are these burns, and you know, maybe these burns in the next 10 years will be highly beneficial to deer coming back and new growth and stuff, but is there a certain rollover point where this stuff kind of becomes unuseful? I mean, it's there for cover and things like that, but does it get to a point where it's not as great for forage?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's as easy as, you know, saying 25 years, or it depends on site and everything else. But, you know, when you're looking at those benches with, you know, some of it's 100-year-old brush, and you lose productivity potential for sure. And it's not nearly as nutritious. It's more difficult for deer to, you know, access to use. And so, to your point, yes, some of these fires are going to be, they have the potential to be beneficial moving forward. But a lot of it'll depend on what that site's going to look like in the future, and if we can keep out those invasive annuals, and if we can keep it from burning again, and if we can have proper grazing on some of it, and, you know, keep horses out of some of it, you know, whatever it is, as long as it's managed well, yeah, I think there's definitely room for benefit in the future. But we don't want to lose too much of that bench in too small of a window also. So yeah, it's a really tricky tightrope we're on.
I wanted to go back to the horse thing and just tell Bert that, you know, I agree with you, Bert, on that, but I don't know that, I'm sure that Endow has their ideas about those horses and everything else, but it's really the BLM that's it's a federal thing that we just don't have any control over. So what are the avenues that we could take to try to address trying to initiate some type of change when it comes to the horse management? What is that as a team? What would that look like?
I think, you know, they're potentially limited. You know, solutions to the wild horse problem, I think, begin and end in Washington. And so I think if we, you know, collectively with the other teams and with other state agencies and, you know, can get some coalition to put something together, I think there's room for, you know, potentially benefiting the landscape. But it's pretty limited unless we get congressmen and congresswomen's ears.
Can I chime in a little bit?
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good question. Let me move my screen here because my camera's over here, so it makes it look like I'm kind of looking you in the eye. So I think there's a couple things. I got a document right in front of me, signed in July of 2020 that Endow pushed through to fence 12 springs in the Go Shoots and Dolly Vardens. And the BLM actually signed that. So we have a signed decision sitting on our doorstep right now from the BLM that supposedly authorizes the fencing of those springs. Ironically, the BLM is holding that decision up because the horses are out of control. They are using the elevated AML numbers as justification to not conduct those fencing projects. And so I think there's, you know, certainly we pound this drum a lot coming from the department, coming from the Habitat Division on the impacts of wild horses to habitat resources, water resources, and obviously ultimately wildlife. But I think that, you know, hearing from folks that are not the Department of Wildlife in targeted ways and meaningful ways, pictures and letters, it really does help. And it goes into a, you know, if it's professionally put, that actually builds a case for them for gathers, because there's a lot of competition for financial resources to conduct gathers. And so, I mean, Scott's totally right. Big picture, it's answered at Washington, D.C. You know, smaller scale, you know, protecting a spring here or there or pushing forward a gather. I mean, I do think some, you know, and maybe it comes from a mule deer enhancement team. I mean, obviously, that's up to the committee. I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that, you know, outside input is definitely valuable and helps the federal agencies to make some of the right decisions. I think you're on mute, Dave.
Oh yeah. So with that said, is there anything that would define our existing mule deer situation as listing it as a decline? Would that significantly would that demonstrate that they were on their way toward being somewhat threatened or significantly reduced. And would that help with that, with that encouragement, you know, at that angle?
It should. It should. When you read the Wild Horse and Burro Act, there's a lot of language in there that points to, you know, thriving ecological balance and health of wildlife populations and consultation with the state wildlife agencies. And, you know, my opinion, professional opinion is, yeah, it should. And I think the BLM is you know, under FLIPMA and other policies, you know, they need to manage for multiple uses, and they really should be taking that into account. But the reality is the politics are so crazy on this topic that wild horses kind of rule the day. And there's, you know, it's those small victories of, you know, protecting water sources for wildlife and ensuring, you know, long-term sustainable water sources for everything. I mean, that's, you know, that's really what I see can be attainable without a bigger push.
Well, and I think, you know, I agree with all of that, and I think that's the way to go. And it's got to be done professionally. You can't do a knee-jerk reaction like I did on camera, unrecorded. That, of course, does not happen. And it was actually a comment made in 1975 by somebody else, and I just thought I'd use it. But I think that elected officials would be a good way to go after them a little bit, organize the county. Elected officials, I mean, they all know there's a horse problem, but they don't have any organized direction toward it. They talk, they send out messages, they do things. Well, we need, if we're going to do something that way, we need a professional that's away from the department, because the department's tainted anyway. We need a professional to go out and do this stuff and bring back the right reports. I can't write them. I don't know, maybe some of you can, but the reports about what they're doing to the sage hens. And the minute we use mule deer as a reason for or we use the horses as decline for mule deer, they're going to throw up, well, but you give out all those tags, so you're shooting them. You're not helping yourself at all. So we got to be really cautious in the direction we go with using our wildlife as a detriment to get the horses off the range. I think we've got to use the range destruction, the water shed destruction, all that stuff, the big dust clouds and the 150, 250 head of horses running down the side of the road, all of those things. But with this small group, maybe we could find somebody who would be willing to take that project on. And I don't know where we'd find the money, but I think that's what's got to happen. Maybe with all these mule deer enhancement groups, all the other counties, we could put together a group that could get something done like that. But I think that's a major way to go to have a den on those wild horses.
This is Henry again. A few years ago, Endow presented us a film that somebody had done some work on what wild horses were doing to the country. And I only seen it once. I was wondering if we could get that film again. I can't remember who did it, but it was a good one, you know, as far as the destruction that horses do to the land.
It was horse rich and dirt poor.
That's the name of it, Dave?
Yeah. It was actually done, I think, it was done by Endow, I believe. So, you know, even if we were to get those, so the other factor is, I mean, getting that accomplished, you know, would be amazing, but I mean, the long, slow climb back from the habitat destruction, it's really hard to say what that would look like. You know, that habitat has been so decimated by overuse that it might take, who knows, it might take 50 or 100 years for it to recover, you know, but that's what needs to happen. I mean, so, I mean, we just have to find some points, you know, obviously we've defined the points of the factors that are affecting, the major factors affecting, and try to choose something that we could try to pursue here.
Unless anybody has any more questions, that's a pretty good tie into what Tom's going to talk about right now. So anybody?
Okay. Well, I guess I'll jump in right quick, and then we can have any additional questions or anything all on my little dog and pony. But first of all, I want to thank all of y'all for your interest and your willingness to participate on a subcommittee like this. You know, it means a lot having a big variety of perspectives and opinions, and that's kind of the whole intent of this thing. And, you know, a lot of people, it's easy to talk about stuff and complain about stuff and, you know, throw stones or what have you, but we really appreciate those that have the interest and the passion to actually be, you know, part of the solution here. But real quick, I'll share my screen and we'll kind of get into kind of what this process is going to look like going forward. Maybe answer some of your questions there, Bert, and some others. Can you all see that those two sheets? Okay, so anyway, yeah, so tonight's meeting, of course, was more of a kickoff type of a meeting, more informational, kind of get the juices flowing. Future meetings coming up, we're going to be doing, or the subcommittees will be doing more actual work and getting into some limiting factors and having some real in-depth discussions about this stuff. We'd also like to try and schedule some field trips. We'd like to do at least one field trip, maybe between now and the next kind of formal meeting, to get out on the ground and look at some specific areas or issues. And, you know, Scott will be reaching out, just checking on everybody's availability, and then asking maybe for some ideas. If other folks have some ideas of particular places or issues that they think would be important to take that group, you know, we'll plan some field trips accordingly. But kind of in a nutshell, the intent of this mule deer enhancement program effort is to use more of a collaborative process, just including, like I say, people from a variety of backgrounds with a variety of perspectives and opinions to help, you know, first of all, identify the primary limiting factors affecting mule deer populations across the state. There's one of these subcommittee teams for every mule deer unit group in the state, every management area, similar groups. So it's a big effort. And we just want to collectively come up with what are a lot of those limiting factors, what are some projects or strategies that can be used to address some of those. And all those, you know, Scott went over a ton of the challenges with what's going on with the Area 10 population, you know, and NDOW knows a bunch of those challenges, as does everybody else. We really have no doubt there's other opinions and perspectives out there. And the more ideas we get, you know, the more effective we can be. And actually, as Bert and Dave were saying, even when the challenges are obvious, like, you know, with feral horses, getting some fresh perspectives or ideas on ways to address even that challenge is where things might really benefit us. You know, just thinking outside the box regarding ways to turn up the heat on the BLM or on Washington, something like that might be something these teams come up with that could be really beneficial. And it was actually pretty encouraging just listening to the conversations we've already had tonight, some ideas of how to maybe even tackle that issue. But anyway, so once we get a field trip maybe done, we'll be looking at these limiting factors that I have up on the screen. We'll go out and do a field trip, but in the meantime, hopefully all y'all will start thinking about maybe some limiting factors that we talked about tonight, maybe some other ones that you know of. We don't want this to be done in a vacuum. You know, we have a certain number of subcommittee members that'll be voting members. But, you know, we encourage folks to go out and talk to your peers, you know, talk to just people, you know, other folks that are really into mule deer, pick their brains and just, you know, kind of talk about it and think about some of these limiting factors. And on the left here is the sheet we'll be tackling first off at our next formal meeting. We'll start going through that. It has a list of some potential limiting factors. It's not all inclusive by any stretch. This is area 7, 8, 9 one. I just had that on a presentation, but area 10 will have the same one. Again, it's not totally inclusive, but you know, some of the things on there we talked about, or Scott did, wildfire, feral horses, you know, even climate and weather. And maybe not much we can do about that, but it's good to identify those. What we'll be asking each subcommittee member to do is rank those potential limiting factors. We can add additional ones, whatever, but from a 0 to 5. So 0 is, man, we just don't think that's influencing the population. 5, yeah, that's absolutely, I think, one of the biggest limiting factors. And once the entire subcommittee ranks those sheets, they'll be averaged out to identify the top 2 or 3 limiting factors that the subcommittee comes up with. The next step on the right side of that screen would be the mule deer needs assessment. And again, this is kind of an example, not all inclusive, but if, you know, gosh, conifer invasion was floated to the top of the subcommittee's limiting factors, there's some ideas there for some things that we could use to address those. So, you know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or anything. And then once some projects are identified, each subcommittee across the state is going to be asked to identify a couple or 3 projects or efforts or studies or what have you to address some limiting factors. Those will end up going to the Oversight Committee. So the actual Mule Deer Enhancement Program Committee of the Commission. And that committee will prioritize and rank those projects statewide and decide, you know, which ones will be, you know, pushed from the Mule Deer Enhancement Program side each year. And this isn't a one-off. We're not looking at doing it this year and then wrapping it up. This is going to be an ongoing process, and each year kind of go through this process. What's going on with the deer herds now? Have limiting factors changed? Are there other projects we can do? And it'll just be an annual process. I'll pop into this next one. So some things that can be used to fund these projects, there's a bunch of stuff that's already existing out there. There's the Heritage Fund account, you know, a lot of NGO partners, federal land management agencies. There's the Predator Management Fund, Habitat Conservation Fee. There's a lot of stuff. And what's important that I like to bring up to the subcommittees when you're thinking about these projects is how they're going to be prioritized at the committee level, the Oversight Committee level. And of course, there's a bunch of things that'll influence the priority of those projects from their perspective. If there's multiple partners, if there's NGOs that are willing to jump on board, if there's, you know, private landowners, if there's counties, any of that, you know, that can add some juice to your recommendations and maybe get them up the prioritization list. If there's already existing funding, you know, there's projects out there that Scott and others are working on now that already may have some NEPA in progress. There may be some that NEPA's done. There may be some that need NEPA, you know, initiated. But if there's NEPA that's already going on or has been done, and there may be some funding attached to it, and you pick some of those things up as projects, that's going to bump up the prioritization for the statewide level anyway. So a lot of those things can influence the projects. You're probably, you may or may not have noticed, it is kind of a glaring absence of federal land management partners right now on this meeting. BLM is intending to participate in these. We've come up with a charter, or the committee has, which is something the BLM asked for. So the BLM will be participating on these subcommittees as voting members, what have you. So we will have some federal land management partners, which again will lend itself to maybe getting some things done a little bit better and identifying some things we can tackle. That's still being worked out, but they will be here. And then real quick, before I take any questions, or Scott does, the Oversight Committee that was appointed by the commission is on this list here, and it consists of several wildlife commissioners, Commissioner Keel, Commissioner Almberg, Barnes, Shane Rogers. Charlie Clements is on the committee. He's Department of Agriculture rangeland scientist. Jeremy Drew, which a number of you probably know him. He was a former wildlife commissioner and a chairman. He's a resource specialist. Corey Lytle with the Meadow Valley Wildlife Unlimited. Jim Rackley, Nevada Muleys, so we have, and Josh Vittori, several NGO folks there. And then we will have BLM and U.S. Forest Service participation on that oversight committee as well. But kind of in a nutshell, that's what's going on. We'd like to get some field trips scheduled. And then if at all possible, we'd like these subcommittees to meet and really start discussing these limiting factors and identify some projects to submit to that oversight committee by August would be great. I know that's a pretty heavy lift, but the sooner the better. And again, this isn't a one-off, so we have, a lot of time to think about it going into the next year as well. But I didn't mean to talk so fast, but I know it's getting kind of late. I didn't want to keep anybody on here too long. So if there's any questions, fire away, or you can still grill Scott about what's going on with deer in Area 10 as well. All right, I must have done a thorough job or a crappy job. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I just wanted to know how we would receive certain communication, and will it be all through email, or is there any other forms of communication we might be using?
It's the formal communication will primarily be email. But Scott and Caleb and myself and everybody, I think, has everybody's, phone numbers and what have you. So any meeting agendas, links, which hopefully we're done with. Hopefully we get to have these meetings in person moving forward, knock on wood. But that was my other question. If we would have any in-person meetings. Yeah, no, we're all just hoping we're chomping at the bit to have in-person meetings. But yeah, formal stuff, primarily emails. So keep your eyes peeled for those. Right. But then we also, make some phone calls and act
Sounds like good, Tom. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just gonna add one thing real quick. July 10th, we're having a volunteer guzzler project in the Butte Range. So if you guys are interested, mark it on your calendars. You can get with Scott or I for more information. I know how much Dave likes shovels.
I'm all over it.
Bars.
I don't know how many of y'all are volunteers either, but it will be up on that volunteer site and stuff. But like Caleb said, hold the hammer, Scott, and we can point you in the right direction. Should be nice and cool that weekend.
Yeah, nothing like being in the buttes in July.
It'd be awesome.
I know I was on the volunteer list at one time, but I haven't ever received anything from the volunteer list. So maybe I need to update that somehow.
There's
Yeah. Little bit off topic, but they did change their system. So I think, yeah, there's some updates that need to be done.
The old system was not very good, frankly. So, yeah, but I think this new system appears to be pretty slick once you're in it, from what I've seen anyway.
and you
I
can
think it's
sign up
ran
on the
through
Alchemy site.
Yeah,
Oh, it's on the Calcami site?
yep.
Okay. Okay.
Scott,
And
I
if you're
think,
feeling really frisky, we're doing a Cracker Johnson fence build on, I think the 6th through the 8th or something.
Cassandra, did you jump in there?
Yeah.
I see, there's a hand raised. So are you ready to take some public comment or you want to wait till we officially move? to public comment?
Well, yeah. Oops, once we're done with some questions, yeah, I let Jim know that we do public comment to wrap it up. So if that's it for questions, we can move to public comment for sure.
Okay. Agenda item number 4, public comment. Persons wishing to comment are invited to raise their virtual hands in the virtual meeting forum. Each person offering public comment during this period will be limited to not more than 3 minutes, or people may provide public comment via email to ndowgame@ndow.org, ndowgame@ndow.org. All emails will be part of the public record. And so it's 7:36, we'll go till 7:39.
Okay, well, I've got virtual hand raised here by Jim Cooney from Elko. Jim?
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for serving on this committee. First of all, listening, I had dittos for Bert's comment with regards to the wild horses. And it intrigues me just a little bit, a statement that Caleb made where the department's already had the authorization to fence off those water sources. I think first and foremost, that has to be pushed hard because you're going to do irreparable damage to those key resources, especially over in that area. So maybe having one of the BLM people on this particular committee after we've gotten that charter put together may be the approach to push forward and get some crews out there to get those springs fenced off and address the resource first and then deal with getting rid of the excess horses. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move to adjourn at 7:38.
Yeah, we don't have any other email, public comment or anything else.
Okay. Well, I said that we were gonna wait till 7:40.
Yeah, we should probably give it a couple more minutes. So I'll let you know if an email comes and
Okay.
Scott's ready to get home to supper.
Yeah.
So is everybody else.
While we're sitting here, Caleb, do you know how to spell your last name?
Apparently not.
No.
I don't know that I set that, do I?
Yeah,
Yes, you do.
When do I do that? When I type in?
yeah, you can
Fat fingers.
click on the,
Do.
you go over your face and go on the 3 dots there, you can change it.
I like it like that.
Yeah.
Mikado's got a ring to it.
Yeah.
Mikado.
Salib Mikado. There we go. Look at that. You should have all the faith in us to manage your mule deer resource.
Can I
They
ask,
only had spell check, right?
can I ask a totally unrelated question? Of the guides that are in the room or on virtual, is it acceptable? I need to know if anybody
I bet.
guides, or is there a licensed guide for Area 6 strictly? Or does anybody,
Most people aren't strictly for Area 6. It's more of a regional or statewide permits, you know. It
So-
depends on if it's Forest Service or BLM ground, you know.
so the forest hasn't officially licensed anybody there?
There are, I think even Henry has a permit on the Forest Service. I only have a BLM permit up there, but there's a handful of guys who have Forest Service permits up there, if that's what you're asking.
I was, and I couldn't find it under the Nevada Outfitters for the units and areas. I don't know where you even look. Asking for a
Could be,
friend,
yeah.
not me.
Yeah, it's on the website. It should go on there and it'll tell you what areas each master guide is licensed in. Should be. I haven't looked for a while. Maybe we got problems.
Maybe I'm like Caleb, my fingers didn't hit the right button, but I didn't see it. So,
I'll take
Anyway.
it. I'll email you a link.
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence.
Yep. So no public comment.
Okay, do we have to move to adjourn?
Negative. That is completely within your powers.
Okay, so we'll adjourn this meeting at 7:41. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And
Thank you, everybody.
a quick point, I'll be sending out a doodle poll really pretty darn soon. And we'll start looking at those field trips hopefully within the next month or so. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.